Okay, so it's time for my review of the Apple AirPods Max 2. And the last video I did on an AirPods Max, I went on a deep dive to figure out what exactly is going on with its sound quality. I talked about all kinds of weird things like mythological birthing rocks. I was born over there on this rock. And at the time, I concluded that it's basically impossible to understand the acoustic performance of this device. And now, we here on this channel have new evaluative methods that allow us to understand these devices better than ever before. And what I'm going to show you in this video is information about the Apple AirPods Max 2 that literally nobody else has seen before. Well, except probably Apple's engineers. They probably have this information, but nobody else has this information. And so hopefully this is going to shed some light on how these devices are actually performing on real human heads. Okay, let's get going. Okay, so the usual disclaimer time here. Nobody sent this to us. We had to just buy it. That's just how it goes with Apple. And for context, I love the Apple AirPods Pro 2. I did not like the AirPods Pro 3. I've not been paid by Apple to say nice things about this. I have not been paid by Apple's competitors like Samsung or Google or Sony to say mean things about this. I don't care. I don't care. And I do want to just give you guys the gist of this up front here. This is the Apple AirPods Max 2, but not a lot has changed. They have a whole list of stated improvements that they have done with this device, but let me be clear, this is a iterative product if there ever was one. And I had to laugh a bit when I saw the list of improvements because there's all these different things that are meant to make this a smarter device, like conversational awareness, voice isolation, personalized volume, adaptive audio. There's live translation, and you can bet they're doing stuff with AI in here at some level. But they didn't really talk at all about changes to sound quality, or at least they didn't talk about it in ways that were meaningful. But there have been some. So for anybody who is unaware, the original AirPods Max took a sensible approach to a consumerish tuning. That is, bass elevated and treble elevated with a mostly clean and reasonable mid-range. It's just that the transition between the mid-range and the treble was a little bit rocky, causing the treble to be a bit spicy. The best way I can describe the AirPods Max 2 is that it goes for a similar sound signature, just with a little bit of refinement in some of the problem areas. But more importantly, the improvement that they've made here is for a more consistent response than ever before. Now, I'm going to show you guys some measurements that demonstrate this, but what you need to know about these types of devices is that for the upper mid-range and lower treble, the in-situ variation on different people goes absolutely wild. So this is one of the reasons why it's so challenging to tune a closed-back headphone or an ANC headphone, this type of device, because you can't predict what the response is going to be like for every person, especially in that band. It's rather difficult to do. And because of that problem, you see competitors like Bose doing their custom tune thing where they are playing a stimulus tone and then snapshotting the ear response for the canal transfer band to try and linearize that region. Well, it seems that Apple have also managed to minimize the variation that exists inherent to these devices, and that's a very good thing. Now, one note before looking at the measurements, before looking at any headphone measurements of the Apple products, you need to ensure that the measurements you're reading are primed.
The problem is that all of you are doing it wrong.
What is priming? Well, that's the need to play a stimulus tone like music, or in this case, a certain noise tone, to trigger its behavior when you're actually listening to music. Because that's the picture that we want to understand. So before running any kind of measurement, it needs to be primed. And I can guarantee you there will be reviews of this product showing measurements that do not have it primed. That's just how this works. So I want to just let you guys know this has been primed, and if you are looking at measurements for the AirPods Max, ensure that the device has been primed, because otherwise the response won't be accurate for how you're actually hearing the product. So let's dive into the headphone measurement data now. I'm going to show you this on the B&K 5128, and then I'll also show you how this measures on my own actual head. So you can see the AirPods Max 2 is well controlled for the bass. It doesn't bleed into the mids. It has a really consistent and linear mid-range response up until around 2 kilohertz, followed by the dip that we're used to with the original AirPods Max as well, and then some of that rockier, elevated, emphasized treble. The treble is still a problem with this headphone, and subjectively as well, like it sounds a bit on the intense side for me. But regardless, up until around like 2.5 kilohertz, the AirPods Max 2 is rather impressive. And I can't say that about many noise canceling headphone competitors. Like I can't say that about even the $1,000 plus ones. They're not nearly as consistent and linear as this. Now here's the raw response with a channel balance. And for anybody who's new to this, the rise up there exists because the ears impact sound on the way to the eardrum. And that's what happens. There's a rise up there that is the contribution of the ear canal and the pinna effects and all of that stuff. This is nerdy stuff that you don't need to know about. But basically the channel balance is good. Now you see there's that chasm at around 5 kilohertz. I'll show you guys the on-head results here where this doesn't actually show up the same way on my head. But first, let's take a look at how this compares to the original AirPods Max, and you can see the things that I'm talking about here where it's a little bit less aggressive in the treble, a little bit smoother throughout the transition between the mids and the treble. So these are things that are pushing this headphone in the right direction. But more importantly, look at how much variation there is in that 1 to 3 kilohertz band for the original AirPods Max. And again, this is just for one head and one set of ears. Across multiple people, this is going to be even more variable. For the AirPods Max 2, again, for the same amount of placements, you're getting way less variation. So that's a very good thing. And the same is true when I move over to the gross data here. You can see that there is a very consistent and quite frankly linear response for everything up until that dip that you see in the ear gain. What does this sound like? Well, for folks who are unaware, if there's a recession to the upper mids and lower treble, things can sound a little bit on the muted and muffled side. If there's too much energy there, things can sound shouty and glaring and honky and aggressive, and everything can sound a little bit too right. And Apple have consistently erred on the side of the recession for their audio products. This is also very different from what you find with many of the Samsung based products because the Harman research has a different style of target that they go for. Bass and treble are similarly proportional to one another, just that the way they go about achieving that is different. The AirPods Max series is more sub-bass and upper treble focused, whereas many of the Samsung or Harman based tunings are more bass and ear gain, bass and the rest of the ear gain, right? But quite frankly, I like the way that the mids and lower mids are handled better on the AirPods Max series than many of those other ones. Now, that's at a typical listening level. Here you can see the impact of the volume-dependent dynamic equalization that occurs with this headphone. So at louder volumes, you'll get different levels of bass and treble than at quieter volumes. And this is consistent with Apple's other audio products. But I think at the volume levels that most folks are going to be listening to this headphone, it's going to be still a bit more on the V-shaped side of things. So Apple have done a good job with much of the tuning here. It's just that when you get to the treble, things fall apart a little bit. And for that, I'm going to show you what this is like on my actual head. We're able to measure headphones on our own heads using in-ear microphones. And because we went to a lab to get our head-related transfer function to understand how our heads and ears are filtering the sound, we can then subtract what our anatomy is imparting to the sound from the measurement to understand just how the headphone is behaving when it's actually being worn by a real human being. And this is important because you have to imagine with devices as sophisticated as these, they are testing them on real human heads, not just measurement rigs. And we're going to see some differences here that are rather interesting. So let's move over to the on-head results. So here's how the AirPods Max 2 measures on my own actual head with my HRTF subtracted from the measurement. That's nerdy stuff that you don't need to care about. Just this is exactly what it's doing on my head and exactly how I'm hearing this product. Now, unfortunately, I don't yet have on-head data for the original AirPods Max. Maybe that's something that I'll be able to get in the future here. But you can see that the response is notably different in a couple of spots. It trends similarly for most of it. You can see it's bass and treble emphasized, so like a V-shaped or U-shaped kind of sound, with a couple of, rocky features throughout the treble. And we expected this, but the features aren't exactly a one-to-one match. And you can see that on my head, you get a similar dip at around 3 to 4 kilohertz, but then that chasm at 5 kilohertz is more of like a peak and then a dip. And then it's after that where the treble goes rather spicy. Here it is when I'm wearing glasses versus when I'm not. And this is a big deal because when you wear glasses, you break the seal. The AirPods Max series has leakage compensation built in, which is very useful. And you can see that it's still consistent all the way up until 2 kilohertz, which is kind of remarkable. In fact, it's consistent for almost the majority of the response, just a couple of differences that could also just be down to seating and positional differences. So really, wearing glasses with this type of headphone is not causing any problems. And that's a good thing. I'm actually very impressed with that result. When we look at the comparison for the AirPods Max 2 for on-head data versus on-rig data, the features are actually a little bit more resonant on my head, it seems. What's more perceptually relevant here is the wideband presentation that you get, which is this, again, V-shaped, U-shaped kind of sound signature. And For anybody wanting that kind of presentation, this is not a bad choice. And I also tested the Apple AirPods Max 2 ANC on versus off. All of this is on the forum thread that I made for this. So if you're interested in deep diving on the data, I'm going to link the forum thread for this below. And that's where if you're interested to learn more about the process for how we capture this data, I've detailed that a little bit in the description of this forum thread as well. And as always, these videos are made possible by headphones.com. So if you value what we do here, consider checking them out the next time you're in the market for a new pair of headphones or IEMs or any other audio equipment. So that's the AirPods Max 2's sound quality. If you were to compare this to the Bose QC Ultra Gen 2, for example, or the HDB 630, the AirPods Max 2 has probably, arguably, the best mid-range of the bunch of them, like at the most linear and consistent mid-range. The Bose QC Ultra Gen 2's is also rather good. The problem there is that you need to dive into the app to EQ it to make it so that it's actually audible, because so much of that headphone is dominated by bass and treble. With the AirPods Max 2, it's also dominated by bass and treble, but it's more pushed towards the edges of the sound. And again, similar to the original in that regard. But we have to recognize and praise improvement when it has taken place, and it seems like the AirPods Max 2's sound quality is an improvement over the original. It's a marginal improvement, but it's enough where it takes it from being a headphone that I didn't really like the sound of very much to one that I find reasonably palatable. I wouldn't necessarily choose this every day, but for an ANC headphone on the go, it's defensible. But a key omission that should be the deal breaker: there is no customizability for the sound here. What if you didn't want a V-shaped kind of sound? Too bad. I know there are people who are going to talk about the headphone accommodation stuff. You shouldn't be using headphone accommodations. We actually have a video about that. What they need to do is add to their iOS section for the AirPods an EQ option. Like, yes, obviously parametric EQ would be the way to do this. And this is where headphones like the HDB 630 are way better, right? They have full parametric EQ, or even the Moondrop Edge, right? I don't even need that. I just need them to do something. Because just like the Bose QC Ultra Gen 2, there's a ton of sophistication in this device to make it more consistent, and these products need to be celebrated for that. It's just hard to do so when they shoot themselves in the foot by not doing the most basic thing that you can do. They know that listener preference is not just one sound signature. Everybody should know this, and to just not give people the option is a serious limitation on basically all of Apple's audio products. They need to figure out that their customers aren't stupid. Even if you're worried that they might mess up the sound. Oh no. Anyway, just have a reset function. It's just not a very good argument against putting customizability in a device that begs for customizability. It's like having a sports car with no wheels. Like, yeah, it's nice to look at, but it can be so much more if you just put wheels on it. All right, that's my rant for this product, and it was inevitable. Now, Apple claims that the AirPods Max 2 improves on a ton of other features, including spatial audio with better processing from the H2 chip and a personalized spatial audio profile. And we'll need to make a dedicated video about this at some point, and in my opinion, Apple does this rather well, but it's also an open question as to whether or not this type of experience is worth chasing or just a gimmick. For now, just keep in mind that you can only use this if you have an iPhone with a true depth camera. Similarly, in my opinion, Apple are some of the very best when it comes to transparency and making it feel like the world around you is just still there while you're wearing headphones. It's kind of remarkable. So if the integrations and the smart features are really important to you, this does become a more compelling device, and it's just more compelling than it ever was in the past. The problem remains, they didn't change the things that they should have changed with a version 2 of this design. And if anybody has had issues with things like the headband wearing out, or the pads causing condensation to build up, or any issues to do with the mechanical design or the case that it comes in, there's nothing new here, and that's kind of a shame, because this would have been an opportunity to make a more meaningful overhaul to this design. There was reasonable criticism for that headphone, and it's going to apply here as well. This design was never good enough where you couldn't have found meaningful things to improve about it, which is, I think, how Apple likes to approach some of their products, right? Like, come up with something that's good for these types of things and then perfect it. It was not an amazing starting point. For other things about this headphone, things like ANC, they do list improvements, and there are improvements here. But it's marginal. It's a minimal improvement. And things like Bluetooth 5.3 and lossless through USB-C, these are all nice things, but they don't meaningfully improve what's going on here. the headband wearing out, the lack of collapsibility or foldability. It doesn't have that. You know, the condensation buildup, the earpads are basically the same. And so it feels like this is a missed opportunity. That's basically the subheading for this review, is that the AirPods Max 2 is just a missed opportunity to do something great because they have the ability to do that. We know this. And if anything, I was looking forward to this release in the hopes that they would listen to feedback and get out of their own ass. If you're considering a headphone for travel, my money is going to go to either the Bose QC Ultra Gen 2 or the Sennheiser HDB 630, depending on the kind of person that you are. If you care about ANC and comfort and ease of use, the Bose QC Ultra Gen 2 is fantastic for that. It might not have the same build quality as the AirPods Max 2, but it's way more comfortable. And the Sennheiser HDB 630 is arguably better tuned than this out of the box, and it gives you full parametric EQ. Yes, that was the thing that signaled to me like all these other brands in the consumer space need to catch up when it comes to customizability. I'm looking forward to when parametric EQ becomes the spec on the spec sheet that manufacturers and brands can hang their hat on and say, we've done it. Here, look, it's good. As it is right now, we don't get that, and we have to be sad. Now, as with the other reviews that we're doing these days, I'm going to give the AirPods Max 2 a ranking out of 10, and there's a lot that's actually gone into this ranking system. If you'd like to learn more about how we do this, you can check that out up on headphones.com, where others of us have ranked hundreds of headphones, and so if you want to see how this stacks up, you can do that there as well. So for the AirPods Max 2, I like the bass. It's elevated, but not in a way that is unpalatable or untasteful. It's not muddy or bloated or anything like that. It's just lots of bass in a good way. I like the mid-range a lot. I think it's fantastic, just that the upper mid lower treble transition is still a bit quirky, but better than the predecessor. And the treble is still a bit of a mess, but again, an improvement. So based on that, I have the Apple AirPods Max 2 at a 5.1 out of 10, but I find it a bit heavy and uncomfortable, so that bumps down the overall score to a 4.7. And just for anybody who's confused by that, our scoring system is not the usual compressed scale where everything gets at minimum 7 out of 10. We're using the full range of possible sound quality that could potentially exist, and it's not based on, the range of products that you could potentially compare the headphones to. In fact, I have the original AirPods Max at a 4.1 out of 10, so the 2 being an improvement at a 5.1, this makes sense. Okay, that's going to do it for this video. As always, if you want to learn more about this, there will be a forum thread linked in the description where you can see more of the measurements that have been done. If you want to chat with me and tell me that I'm wrong, you can do so in our Discord, also linked below. Until next time, I'll see you guys later. Bye for now.